started to keep on schedule. So welcome to this panel featuring some research from the Army Cyber Institute and the NATO Cooperative Cyber Defense Center of Excellence. My name's Erin Pike, and I'm a researcher with the Army Cyber Institute, and I have the pleasure of serving as moderator for this panel, which is actually more of a research showcase than a traditional panel. So what I'll do is I'll introduce each presenter before their presentation, and then we'll save all the questions for each speaker for a general question and answer session at the end. Okay, so with no more ado, our first speaker will be Mr. Are Reintum, who is the Cyber Defense Exercise Manager for the NATO Cooperative Cyber Defense Center of Excellence. And today we'll have the pleasure of hearing about some advanced multinational live-fire cyber defense exercises that he's been conducting since 2014, such as Locked Shields. All right.
So, good afternoon from my side. Should I already jump on, yeah?
Yep.
Very good. Thank you very much for the kind introduction. So good afternoon from my side. My name is Are, working in a NATO CCD COE, as already mentioned, and my focus area is cyber defense exercises. So today I'm going to do a short introduction about our exercise called Locked Shields. I put here a picture. It's Die Hard movie 4. It's unfortunate we're not going to watch it, but it was a mind-breaking movie for let's say a lot of people. It happened actually in Washington D.C. So Mr. John McClane didn't touch any computers and if he did, then he was smashing somebody with it. So he didn't do any hardcore command line stuff. So anyhow, just to make myself a little bit more clear. Locked Shields. Our international exercise, the US has taken part from that already for the past 3 years. Is there anybody from the Captain Sean Rudy's team in this room? If yes, then please raise up the hand. Of course not, because they are defending and doing some kind of nice cyber operations at the moment. So this is the reason why we don't have anyone of them here. But Captain Rudy has been part of the Locked Shields already for the past 3 years. And US is a good example in that sense that your national guards are also taking part of as a joint team in different other nations' teams. And in 2016, one of the national guards was part of the Locked Shields team that won the 2016 exercise. So this is about your connections with the Locked Shields, and I would recommend to read this Wired article about the NATO war game that the US has been taking part of. It's really good reading. Locked Shields, what it is, it's international, the biggest live-fire cyber defense exercise in the whole world. International, what it means that we have 26 nations taking part of this exercise, mostly our NATO nations and our allies. What are we doing there? Is that the live fire means that we have professional attackers attacking and professional defenders defending the systems at the same time. So we as organizers, we don't know where this exercise is taking us because this is not pre-scripted. We don't know if the red teams are winning, or the red team is winning, or the blue teams are winning. It depends on the skills of the blue teams or the defending teams that are doing this. Our red team consists up of 65 highly trained penetration testers or hackers/hackers that are coming from our partner nations. They know what they are doing. They have done it for 10, 15, or 20 years. So this is not a training event for them, but this is training event for the defenders. We have found a very good motivation packet to this exercise, and the motivation packet is that we are scoring all the moves that the blue teams are doing. So at the end, there will be a winner, and I can assure you that everybody wants to win. Nobody wants to be the second one, or for God's sake, nobody wants to be the last one. So scoring is a very good motivation packet that we have found that we should implement and carry on. Bad picture about the colors, but what we want to do is to play out the full-scale exercise. And full-scale, what we are looking about is tactical, operational, and strategical level. So tactical in that sense that these are the actual people behind the computers doing the work on the command line. Then the operational level persons have to make some kind of decisions and translate the information that is coming from down to up to the strategical level and ask some kind of support, ask some kind of decisions, guidelines, and so on. So this is very complicated. It's really interesting for us as organizers to do it because each level has so different training objectives, and to achieve all of them in one exercise, this is something what we are looking as we are the first ones to do that. Of course, we as a NATO CCD COE are taking part of several other NATO exercises. Why Lock Shields is a little bit different is that we are, playing at a full scale, and also it's in the time-wise, it's a quite good exercise for the training audience. Why? Because usually NATO exercises are at least 1 week or up to 4 weeks long, but our exercise is only 3 days long for the training audience, and during these 3 days they can experience a full-scale cyber attack against their systems. I don't want to go into details of this network map, but this is IT hocus pocus. But what I want to explain here is that what we are building up for our training audience members is that we are taking the usual, or let's say a regular basic network or business IT network system. We are virtualizing it in our environment. There is this DMZ segment where you are offering your public services. Then there is some kind of, regular office network where people are sitting behind the computers, using these computers to send emails, browse web. Then we have this lab environment where you're doing a little bit, some kind of R&D, and the integrity and confidentiality should be, more important in these segments. And then we are always looking that we have to bring in some special systems just to raise the awareness of our training audience, and also to explain the impact of the IT to the higher commands of the chief of defenses, ministries, and even regular generals. And this is the hard part. And what we have done is that we have brought in actual drone system. We were able to simulate a very simplified version of a power grid system developed by Siemens. It's a SCADA part only, so it's not a full version. And we have also brought in some physical PLCs, programmable logical controllers, to this environment. So what we are trying to do is that we're trying to find the balance between the business IT and the critical infrastructure and the military command and control systems. And if we are putting all these kind of things together in one network and giving them to the blue teams or the defending teams to defend, then this will teach them that there are some kind of interdependencies between the military and the business IT, and they have to work together somehow, just to open their eyes more and more. Because during the crisis, if the military takes over the systems, then I haven't seen a military person who is able to hold up or, let's say, manage or ISP or some kind of bank system. And I haven't seen any military or business ITs DBAs or any administrators who are able to operate with a military command and control system. So these kind of systems, we have to just teach them how it is going. Altogether, 3,100 virtual machines in the network. What we have learned is that we have to visualize. And when a general came in, or our president came in, or any other cyber command leader or representative came in, and then we were explaining them that, okay, in our exercise, let's say the file server was taken down. And then, let's be honest, nobody gives a rat's, this part, yeah? That if a file server goes down, this is not something that everybody is thinking about, oh, this is now a crisis, we have to do something. So no, it's really hard to explain that what is the real impact if something goes down. And what we have done is that we have tried to visualize most of our special systems in a way that it should be understandable to everyone who steps into our exercise, and if we are doing the briefings, then he or she should understand what is going on. So what we did, and Joel, maybe this is something for you as well, the interesting is that we simulated together with Siemens. Siemens is the developer of one of the power grid Spectrum 5 systems that is mainly used in most of the Europe, and it's also used here and in Asia and everywhere. What we have done is that we have very good cooperation with the developer. They came in, they helped us to implement, virtualize this power grid part in our exercise environment. And the training objective are two training objectives. One thing is that you have to protect it from the IT-wise, just the server or let's say the servers that this application is running on. And the other part is the functionalities, so the capability, the whole capability that is together with this power grid system or the electrical power grid capability. So if you play around with the functions, then this is something we have to understand. And this is why let's say the developer of the owner of the system helping us out is really important. So they are telling us that, okay, guys, you don't have understanding about how these kind of systems are working. We are showing you what kind of functionalities there are, but you have to mess up to make it a reasonable attack. And this is the most important part. To conduct a reasonable attack, you have to understand from the IT side also the functionality. Otherwise, you will not make a reasonable attack, or you might do an attack that they just can do something from the backups and clear the main damage with, let's say, hours, in bad cases days. But if you do a reasonable attack, then it can take up to, I don't know, weeks or even months in some of the big systems. But again, so the scenario was that we had a military airbase. There was two inputs from east and west. There was radars, towers, takeoff lines. We had a generator and a UPS inside of the scenario. So the attackers had to take down the generator, take down the UPS, and then start to mess around with the inputs. And again, if something happened, then we visualize it in a way that everything started to blink, and everybody understood that something is gone wrong, and it should be a cyber attack. Other capability that we brought in was the real drones that are flying around. So we had a flight zone for the drones. They were flying around, and if the red team was able to take control over the drones, then they were sending the drone away, as you can see here, to somewhere else. That was a no flight zone. Again, something for the operational leaders. If you can see from your common operational picture that your drones are flying away from your flight trajectory, and usually they are armed and full of ammunition and so on. So what kind of decisions you as operational leader will do? How you will get back it? Of course, you can shoot it down, but this was not allowed by rules. So what we did is that we told to the blue teams that you have to regain the control over your drones by IT means. So this was something that was very challenging to the blue teams. Usually doing the defensive side, now they had to regain the control over their own drone back with IT means. Then we took them out of the comfort zone like that. We also simulated NATO Air C2 system. So this is widely used in most of the NATO nations. We were able to put it in our environment, and again, we had several attack vectors. So this is the normal picture that you have a base here and radar there, and this is what you see, on a regular basis. If our red team gained access to this environment, they showed that there is some kind of adversary attacking planes coming towards you, and if somebody sees this in a common operational picture in operational headquarters, then this is something really serious to think about. And again, why we are doing this is just to show to the operational leaders that there is the ways how a regular IT person can mess up your operation if they have these kind of aims or goals. Another vector was that what we did is that not only the tracks, but also we made few other air bases in the same island. So again, it just popped out. From the maritime wise, what we did is that we just popped out about a few of the nuclear submarines in the coast of the island that allies had to defend. And again, just to show that you cannot just blindly trust the systems that are providing you information. And if somebody has access there, we can somehow change the course of your operation. So this is what we are doing. This is something that we are strongly feeling about that this is something that we can do, what we want to do, and we are seeking more help from, let's say, people that are doing this on a regular basis. And what is the outcome of this exercise is that we don't want something like this happen, you know. And if there is some kind of meeting or operational unit meeting or something like that, and they are hearing about cyber attack, then they will just, you know, go crazy and do nothing. So this is our aim, to teach, to show what is going on, what is the impact, and this is the reason why we are conducting this this exercise called Lock Shields. So if you feel comfortable and you like what we are doing, then please find me afterwards and we can discuss it furthermore. Thank you.
Okay. Good job. Thank you, Are. Okay, our next speaker will be Lieutenant Colonel Natalie Banana. She's the Deputy Chief of Research at the Army Cyber Institute, and she's a U.S. Army Cyber Officer and holds a PhD in Applied Mathematics as well as degrees in Computer Engineering and Systems Engineering. She has also recently served as a Distinguished Visiting Professor at the National Security Agency, and this afternoon she'll be speaking about some of her exciting forward-thinking research at the ACI.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. So I'm Natalie, and I'm going to talk to you this afternoon about a really interesting research portfolio we're doing at the Army Cyber Institute. And we call it threat casting. And it's this concept that lets us think about what the future environment we're going to be faced with so that we can ultimately prevent strategic surprise for the Army. And so this is joint work that we're doing with Arizona State University. So now, when I think strategic surprise in the Army, the first thing that pops into my head is Clark Field in the Philippines, right? Absolutely strategic surprise. The absolute idea that 9 hours after Pearl Harbor happened, in the Philippines, General MacArthur and the Far East Air Force was caught with their pants down, with all their bombers still on the grounds in the Philippines, and unopposed Japanese fighter aircraft decimated the fleet, the aircraft that were there. And so how could we have helped General MacArthur to figure out and prevent the actions that happened on 8 December 1941? Obviously, time travel. Time travel would have fixed the problem completely, right? Because he could have jumped ahead in the future. He could have understood what the operational environment was going to look like. He could figure out where the potential threat vectors were that he was going to be vulnerable to. He could have seen all the steps that led up to that fateful day, and then he would have come back and he would have saved the day. Well, unfortunately, given our knowledge of the space-time continuum, that's not doable today. So instead, we have what I will argue is second best, and that is threat casting. So threat casting, what is it? What we do is we bring together a very diverse group of people. They are thinkers and they are doers. They have brown hair and they have pink hair. And they're from academia and government and the military. They're from industry, they're from think tanks. And we all come together and think about, what does the future environment look like in 10 years? What is it that we're going to be faced with? Because the future is not going to be defined by whatever's the next coolest idea coming out of Silicon Valley. It's not going to be defined by that next sweet app that's about to hit the store, or that phone that's going to cost a ton that you've just got to have because of the feature set that's been updated. Instead, the future, at its very heart, is about people. And so that's what our research focuses on. So we start by looking at the social aspect, and we think about how society and culture and individuals, as individuals, we're going to evolve, how our relationships are going to change, how we're going to redefine who's part of our community. And then we look at technology next, and we think about emerging technology that we imagine will be here in 10 years, not only for its own sake, but how we think our future selves are going to want to use that technology. Then, because I'm a mathematician, we have to throw in some math. And so we look at economics, and we look at both macro and micro trends that are going to help define what our daily life might look like, and therefore, what we might be willing to pay or risk to use that technology in the future. And so we do all this by using subject matter experts who provide not only the data, but the data with their opinion of how their field and their domain is going to evolve over the next 10 years, and more importantly, how it's going to interact with the other domains that are there. And then we throw in some science fiction based on science fact. And what we come up with is on the right side of the graph is this visions of the future, what we expect the world will look like in 2027. And once we have this idea of what the future will look like, we meet a person. And in this case, our person was Bill Morgan. He's an inspector at Red Hook, New Jersey at the port, very much a middle-class American in 2027. But oh my, he is frustrated at work because of the faulty sensors that they tend to use. And he's complained to management. I mean, let's be honest, he's complained to his family and friends first, but he's complained to management and done everything the right way. Oh, how frustrating. He's done everything he was supposed to do. Monday night, he had plans to eat dinner with his family, to go home early and have dinner with them. But how frustrating. The sensors broke again, and now he is forced to stay late that night and help manually inspect a portion of the cargo coming through Red Hook, New Jersey, just because the technology we relied on isn't able to. So in threat casting, once we think about what the future environment's going to look like, and we've met our person, we start to explore the threat vectors that have now emerged because of the way that technology in our society has evolved. So we look at those threat vectors that someone could potentially use against us. And in this story, it was all about bananas and milk. No, really, I'm serious. Like bananas and milk brought down our downfall, because what Bill did not realize was that nefarious groups were using their AI to search the widening attack plane, to look for a potential vector, sifting through metric tons of the data that was available, looking for that spot to start their attack, because in 2027, this is very commonplace. And when they saw this tweet that Bill made, this very innocent tweet he made out of frustration that he was gonna miss family dinner that night, they saw a window of opportunity, an opportunity to get a very special package through the port. But what they had to do was they had to expand that window of opportunity. And for them, it was bananas and milk. Now, I'm gonna leave this as a cliffhanger to understand how we get to where we're going. But in the end, what happens is absolute mayhem. Because in the end of the story, what we come up with is a dirty bomb that's delivered to Manhattan at rush hour. Millions dead, the stock market plunges, and life as we know it is really shaken up. And what people do whenever there's a large tragedy is they want to know why. Like, who's to blame? How could we have possibly missed this? And so what threat casting does, instead of really focusing on that, is we explore a much more important question, is what should we have done to secure against this back when we could have? And so remember, I've got all these wicked smart people in the room from lots of different backgrounds, lots of different sectors, with lots of different experiences. And what we come up with in our research is a whole of society approach, because we can't do this by ourselves. So what we come up with are actions that industry can do, and the government can do, the military can do, academia can help us research, think tanks can think about, and even what individuals and communities can do. Because it's not one group that has the answer, but lots of us. So that's kind of the premise, and you're thinking, okay, that's kind of cool. Sounds like you're writing some science fiction, but do you really have anything to show from it? Absolutely. So we've gotten some very positive results so far. And so our successes have to do with these actions that we come up with in our whole of society approach. So Cisco, you might have heard of them. So they took a look at the work we were doing, the futures we were creating, the things that we thought technology sector should start looking at to ensure these negative futures wouldn't happen, and they've adopted some of our futures. They, in fact, took Bill Morgan's story and turned it into a graphic novel, which at the end of this conference, you can download off the website and take a look at to see how it all ends up. But Cisco is using some of our ideas to propel their innovation lab, to push the barrier forward, to make us think about how technology can help be secured in the ways we might want to use it in the future. And so we create these narratives, these stories, for many reasons. And really the main purpose is to start a dialogue within the larger community about the future and the unattended consequences that can happen along the way. Specifically to think about how policies and regulation and certification and even our mental models will need to change to be able to handle the future. and to motivate the conversation. Because from our perspective, a lot of this research that needs to go on, we need to in order to have it resourced today, but it's not going to pay dividends until the future. And so sometimes it's difficult to have that conversation with upper management, why this matters to start doing something today that they may no longer be in control by the time it's ready to roll out the door. And that's where these narratives come in, because we can craft a picture that both technical and non-technical folks can understand. Okay, this sounds pretty cool, but we're doing it closer to home also from an Army perspective. So those of us in the US Army might recognize this. Hard copy editions of Preventive Maintenance magazine used to be in your motor pool every month, and you look forward to seeing it. And in fact, this is the cover from the month I was born. And the story in this edition of Preventive Maintenance is all about how one mistake can derail Army operations and the larger scheme of maneuver. Unfortunately, Preventive Maintenance magazine this year stopped doing its hard copy, and went to only electronic form in January. But I will say, with the first edition rolling off the presses in 1951, a 66-year printed history is a pretty good model to follow. And so that's what we're doing. And so using this tradition of graphic novels to illustrate a moral, the ACI conducted Operation Dark Hammer in September, with a follow-on operation in the spring. And so what we did is we brought together science fiction writers and illustrators, along with Army officers. Some were combat arms folks, some were technical folks, and some were functional area folks, to take these ideas and the themes and the threats that we had teased out in our threat casting work and apply them to a military construct, to military operations. Because if you read 2 Days After Tuesday, you'll see it's a big OPSEC. OPSEC problem is what started this all. We totally get that in the military, and it translates. But many of our concerns in the military don't really translate over to the civilian sector. And that's why the ACI has commissioned a handful of these graphic novels, and we're even turning some into animated movie clips, short animated movie clips, right? We're in the United States government, we don't have that big of a budget. Short clips, don't worry. Really to start the conversation about cyber and digital and how that has to affect military operations in the future. And so we've commissioned 4 of them so far from our September session. One is going to be about how cyber saves the day on the battlefield. It's great. The second one is going to be how cyber kicks our butt because we weren't ready for it on the battlefield, and our adversary was. The third story we've commissioned is going to be about cyber-enabled insider threat. And the fourth one focuses on supply chain disruption and ends with a really big kaboom. So those are the 4 novels that are going to come out of the September session. And I will tell you what, I'm always looking for new ideas as we get ready to host the spring session. So if you have interesting thoughts or themes that you think we're not thinking about when it comes from a cyber, digital, and military perspective, I'd love to hear about it. So our graphic novels are only one success story that come out of threat casting. The other success story is the ability of our technical reports to actually provoke change. So based on the work we did in August of last year, the report we came out with, it actually changed the mind of some large national supply chain corporations when they were forced to realize the unintended consequences of their high-speed push for automation and efficiency. And so now they're actually re-looking how they do risk profiles and risk decisions as they're moving forward in their evolution of IT purchases. We've also got numerous universities, colleges, and think tanks that are starting to explore the action items that we've identified, the things that need further research, and turning them into not only academic papers, but projects for their students to do. And that's part of what we're doing at ACI. We have a handful of researchers that are also working on this, and then cadets at West Point that are working on some of these problems. And so this is a very new research profile that we've started, portfolio. We ran our first threat casting session in August, as you can see on the screen. And this workshop really focused on the evolution of IT, supply chain disruptions, and terrorist use of technology. And what came out of that was really this idea about this widening attack plane. that based on the technological, cultural, and economic shifts and advances in the next decade, that we really begin to see an evolving threat landscape where the attack surface gets larger, the number of people get larger playing in that space, and in fact, the nature of hacking as a means to an end really starts to change into more blended attacks. And so this is almost old stuff, right? It's been out for about a year, so I'm just gonna highlight it really quickly before I move on to the new cool stuff. The big threats we identified mostly had to do with the idea of the weaponization of data itself. And numerous speakers today have talked about this concern about weaponizing data. Because from our perspective, we saw data being used as a weapon, whether that was to spoof or obfuscate or hijack a system. Because if we think about the systems we're going to be using in 2027, not what we're using today, these systems are going to be processing tons, metric tons of data and information. They're going to be turning this information, these nuggets, into insights. And then these systems will ultimately take autonomous action based on that information. And how do they work? Well, they're relying on very complex algorithms to sift through immense amounts of data. And so therefore, the integrity of that data that's feeding them really becomes key. And when we can't validate it at machine speed, nor query how it's making decisions, we virtually have the sense of machines acting independently. Which means if you weaponize that data, ignore the hard math, ignore all the algorithms running these systems, all an attacker needs to do now is weaponize that data against the system. Because now that attacker can cause a bunch of misinformation, not only to increase the fog of war, but to manipulate the reality. Because now if you change what those machines and algorithms perceive as reality, and they feed that back to us, now we're living in a world where people no longer define reality, but machines do. And we also came up with a bunch of required actions. And so if you go to the website, you can download the report and see the host of different things that we suggested need work. In fact, some of our researchers are working on them right now under this idea of a need for new norms. And what does that look like? We have one researcher that's thinking about, well, what would a cybersecurity Amber Alert look like? That's something that people understand. Well, maybe there's some benefit there that could be used. Others are exploring frameworks, like how would we actually go about sharing information, not just within a certain silo, but across silos, across domains, and more importantly, in some method that John Smith could be able to access and understand what's going on. And even others are looking at what should basic cyber education look like, not just at the college or the high school, but what should we consider is important for people to know about cyber. So that was the August report. In May, we ran the workshop again because the first time was such a success. We thought, hey, let's try that again. It was an experiment that worked. And so we went down in May, we went down to Arizona State University, and we pulled a little on the ideas that we came up with in August. And so what we did is a deeper dive into the advancement of artificial intelligence, our diminished ability to conduct intelligence collection. Because if we live in the world of 2027, where compute power is so easy to get, and there are sensors everywhere, how do we collect intelligence in a covert manner? We also looked at the growing complexity of code and what happens when it's no longer human intelligible, and then also what potentially could be the future divisions of work roles between humans and machines. What do we think we're going to optimize machines to do, so that we can start shifting and lifting fire for how we train and educate humans if we know in another 10 years we're not going to need humans to be able to do that. So you can download this entire report off our website. I also have printed copies that we printed. I have like 20 some of them up here on the stage, so afterwards if you'd like to get a copy, come on up and I'll hand it to you. If you're like me and hate reading things on the computer screen, like that's why we printed them. It looks really big, but most of it's because it's our raw data that we've collected. So what's in here is all the participants' feedback, their ideas about visions for the future, their analysis of the SMEs and everything else, so that you can take a look at what we collected to see if you come up with the same conclusions as us. But in it, we also lay out some emerging threats and some required actions that we need to take. Additionally, we took the initial research we did here and it fed into a government accountability report, the GAO, It's a report they're sending to Congress at the end of the year talking about the emerging opportunities, challenges, and implications of artificial intelligence. So our work definitely fed into that report. So what were the 3 cool emerging threats? Because, right, that's the sexy part of this all. How is our life going to be tweaked? And so the first one we came up with that seemed a great theme was this unique way that artificial intelligence could be weaponized. Because surveillance and coercion are not new threats. We've known about them forever. But when you can conduct them with the speed, power, and reach of artificial intelligence, that danger is newly amplified. So if you all recall reading in college the play Julius Caesar, that's where the dogs of war comes from. And in that context, it refers to this idea of the breakdown of law and order that holds society together, that was preventing violence and the destruction of war. And so by letting loose the dogs of war, as he calls for in the play, what he sees is that all the infrastructure of the civil society that had been put in place to protect itself will crumble and unleash the worst of humanity onto itself. And so many of our futures and our participants were exploring this idea: if people, nation states, other groups, start using artificial intelligence to surveil and coerce, it really is almost a modern form of these dogs of war, because now you're forcing people to betray trust, to dismantle corporate guidelines, local and national laws, as well as compromise national security. And so imagine that beyond simply deploying an AI weapon to surveil a targeted person, adversaries can now use it to find the perfect victim for coercion for their nefarious deeds. The second threat we tend to pull on a little bit during our workshop that came out was the idea of traditional munitions factories. I mean, when it comes to factories that are crafting chemical, biological, or nuclear weapons, we know how to find them. We know how they're constructed, we know how they're manned. We can figure out and determine if said factory is making, let's say, nuclear for the purpose of putting it on a weapon, or nuclear as a power plant. But when it comes to AI weaponry that could potentially have some of the same catastrophic effects, this is a new paradigm that becomes very difficult to track. It's subversive and it's integrated into the common picture. And so this becomes a new idea and a challenge when we have to think about the factories that would be creating these weapons, where software instead of hardware are created. So how do we find them? First, how do we even define them? And could we even think about regulating against them? Sticky problems, and that's what threat casting is all about, is finding these hard questions that we need to start taking a look at and thinking about today, so when they become reality, we at least potentially have some potential solutions and options. And the third thing that really came out of this as a threat from this workshop was this idea of what we hear about AI in the news, and the media, and the TV. All we hear about is AI is going to take your job. You are going to become obsolete. There's going to be no use for you. But you know where we see that is in commercials from corporations or organizations that can sell you the fix. They can sell you that degree that's going to ensure you don't become downsized when AI comes here. And so this really led us to this idea of careless destabilization, which refers to the fact that we understand AI as a new technology is going to have some destabilizing effects across multiple aspects of society, from an economical, social, and cultural area. And we know that today. But if all we do today is track possible AI threats and do nothing to correct the course of development and deployment, then we're being careless and allowing it to happen. And that's the careless destabilization. And the effects, if we don't have a say in how this all is developed and who develops it, really smacks into a national security problem. Because what if, from a behavioral modification idea, all of a sudden your Siri or your Google Home evolution of what it looks like in 2027 has shifted to behaviorally nudging millions of users based on an adversary? And so this becomes a problem. So from careless destabilization, we know it's going to have a destabilizing effect. We should start thinking about today what that really is going to be to figure out how we can best secure the nation. And of course, we came up with required actions too. Some are for academics to continue research on. Some are for industry. Definitely some for nonprofits to help enrich their communities. There's a ton that have to be completely done by the government, but the government needs our opinions and our thoughts to how to do that. And of course, how individuals can empower themselves. So given our initial successes, so we've done this twice, and we've come up with some really interesting results and sparked a lot of interesting conversations and academic research that we think will be needed in the future. We're of course doing it again. So we just held a session in September of this year in Washington, DC, and we had 80 people from different organizations, and what we looked at was the evolution of complex automated systems, a very highly susceptible agriculture sector that we predict in the next 10 years is not going to be as important as other key critical infrastructure, so maybe won't get as much cybersecurity love. And so how does that come back to bite us in the butt in 2027? We looked at the accumulation of power via digital means, and really the question of what happens to life if our data becomes untrustworthy. So analysis is ongoing. In fact, I'm in the midst of doing it right now and meeting up with my collaborators next week. We anticipate being able to release these findings in the report after the holidays, so probably in early February. Because we have to, because in February we're going to host the next one. So our goal as the ACI in partnership with Arizona State University is we want to host these twice a year on different topics related around cyber and the digital domain that have some bearing to the military, but also some bearing to society as a whole, to get together a very diverse group of folks that maybe have never talked before, but are thinkers, to figure out what some potential solutions and issues are in the future. So in February, we're going to be looking at space, cyber, and electronic warfare, thinking about how these things might evolve, and also what the privatization of space might look like. And are there lessons we learned from how Silicon Valley stood up that would be beneficial as we start looking about how we move into space? And so we also, in conjunction with Arizona State University, crafted a lab sitting at Arizona State University to help us push through the cyber threat casting project over the next couple years. So maybe this sounded really interesting to you. I mean, I hope so. Maybe you can see applications of some of our work in your own research, and maybe you want to be part of it in your own way. So this is how you can help. I want your ideas. Share your ideas with me. There's my email address. Tell me what cool themes for future threat casting workshops might be, or themes for future graphic novels that you think you don't have time to think about, your organization doesn't have time to think about, but you sure wish somebody was. Share your brain power. Do you want to help be part of this research? Help me synthesize this raw data into themes? Maybe write really meaningful pieces, either in academic journals or trade journals, about some of the ideas we come up with. Or maybe just take some of these action items and research it yourself and implement it in your own life. Help us push the body of knowledge forward. I also want your thoughts. If you've got a few moments, you can read our reports and you come up with different conclusions or different ideas. I want to know, because that will be really great, and let's write about it together. I also want your network. Do you have folks in your organization or that you can think of that you think would be perfect to be participants? So basically, we take 2 days where we just stretch your mental muscles to think about the evolution of the future environment and how nefarious individuals might think. And finally, I want your concerns. What keeps you up at night? What do you wish you had time to think about or that someone needs to? Let me know. Because thinking is always awesome, and our research is all about thinking, but greater than thinking is doing, and that's what we have to start doing today, and we would love to do with you. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much. Thanks so much, Natalie. Like I said, we'll be saving questions for all our speakers to the Q&A session at the end. Next, we'll be hearing from our final two panelists who represent another exciting public-private research partnership. And on the public side, we have Chief Warrant Officer 3 Judy Escabel, who is a research scientist at the Army Cyber Institute. And she has a bachelor's in computer science and a master's in information systems, and also over 18 years of cyber-related operational experience, including signals intelligence, and 2 years in the cyber mission forces on a combat mission team. And on the private side of the partnership, we have Mr. Joe Lango, who is an industrial control system cybersecurity expert with over 30 years of experience in the industrial automation and control industry. He is currently part of the critical infrastructure protection team at AECOM. Prior to joining AECOM, he founded scadahacker.com, a web resource devoted entirely to industrial cyber exercises, industrial cybersecurity. And today they will be sharing with us some exciting joint research on cyber exercises such as Jack Voltaic.
So good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I greatly appreciate this opportunity. So my point up here, intent is to explain to you the background of Jack Voltaic, the historical, and then I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Joel and Jill, who's going to provide more in depth on what we're doing in our next iteration of this, what we call cyber experiment Jack Voltaic. So in this theme of cyber conflict, we know that the way ahead and solution is through public-private partnerships. But the challenge is how do we arrive to having public-private partnerships work in the way to help us to solve those problems? Well, in today's earlier panel, which was focused on private partnerships, some of the solutions that they shared was, why don't we develop ecosystems or have consortiums that involve players that encompass organizations across academia, industry, and government to come together to work through challenges and problems. And that's all good, but another innovative way that the Army Cyber Institute is looking at this research is through exercises. So the slide that you see before you is kind of the approach that we kind of took in one of our research projects that really just started out with a workshop that we were exploring a concept known as cyber mutual assistance, which is a common best practice that is being explored within the energy sector. And it's really, in short, it's the sharing of assets during a cyber physical event. And so it's normally physical type of assets that are shared, but when you add the layer of complexity saying, what does that look like in the cyberspace domain, then maybe you're looking at what does it look like when you're sharing critical skills that are needed, like a forensics analyst, and then layer that on to say, what does that look like when you're dealing with that in a domestic environment where you introduce a military entity like the National Guard. So these are all things where we need to explore, and so we wanted to take this a step further, but the Army Cyber Institute wanted to do this with a industry partner. So at the time, we went ahead and did it with Citigroup, who then was literally our co-lead in this effort known as Jack Voltaic, which is all about prevention, preparation, and response to cyber physical attacks. But we wanted to examine this particular challenge at a different level. So you heard about the Lock's Shield exercise, which is a very prestigious exercise, but it's very large in scale, and there's exercises that are intended to be at that scale, and then you hear about some of them on the military side, like Cyber Guard, Cyber Flag, some of them on the industry side, GridX, Quantum Dawn, that address in those particular sectors, and they all exist for particular reasons, and primarily for training, for refining objectives on maybe incident response plans, all necessary and needed to be able to move forward and work through problems. But when you start kind of scaling down and be able to lift and maybe adjust those types of exercises, it's not as easy. They're very large in scale for a reason and a purpose. So then you get into maybe some of your regional level type exercises that we normally see in the National Guard, and they have their intended purpose. But when you start looking at the local exercises, or more at the municipality or county levels, where a lot of these initial events occur, where you're looking at them in the first 24 through 72-hour period, what really frameworks for exercises does there exist for municipality and local entities where they're looking at these? I would argue to say not much. And if they do, they're normally just working through current incident response plans. It doesn't really look at addressing the gap of how do we look across critical infrastructures, so that it doesn't just look at it from a city perspective or a particular one sector. It actually integrates what it looks like with our private partners, and potentially even introducing and working with our academia partners. So Jack Voltaic, we did this last summer in New York City. And so in this next one, you'll see this is the kind of makeup. If you would like to get more on the design of it, please contact me. Send me an email. I would love to share that with you, but really just want to kind of go over with what it was about. So the top two hexagons at the top were the leads, ACI and Citigroup. We are the ones that literally led the development of this exercise side by side. Hence, we led it. Led it together side by side. So a lot of these exercises that you hear about are either industry-led or government-led. We need more exercises where you have all players representing those various critical infrastructures. So the middle row there represents the emergency sector. So that's all of your emergency sector components within New York City that came to the table and said, okay, we're here, we're gonna plan this thing. And then the bottom row are your industry representatives. So as you could see, we had telecommunications, we had the health sector, we had the energy sector, and we had transportation, all represented. They came to the table as planners, designing and developing the exercise. That is something that you do not see. So when we say, how are we going to get past these challenges dealing with cyber conflict, this is one method or avenue of approach that we need to explore more. And also, let's explore these in a smaller scale. If you look at the total number of participants, it was 137. It's a very small exercise. So if you, again, you have large exercises that exist for purposes and they have their intended purpose, but if you want to remain agile and be able to flex and be able to say, okay, what do we need to do better to maybe have integration with industry on this? So it's just a nice, easy, safe way to do that. And so a success story from this experiment that I'd like to share, and I'm not quoting New York City on this, but about months after, the mayor of New York signed the stand-up of what's called today, and you could research this, is the New York Cyber Command Center. And the lead of the New York Cyber Command Center is what's known as the Department of Information, Telecommunications, and Technology, DOIT. They're leading it. They actually have the charge to respond to a cyber physical event in New York City. And if you look at the way the construct is set up, it has these players involved. So I'd like to think that having them go through this exercise, realizing, opening their eyes that, hey, maybe we need to start thinking like this, it inspired that thought to take to them. And that's really what this experiment was about, and this exercise. It's about to evoke thought within these communities, private and public sectors, at the lowest levels, beginning with our municipalities and our counties, to start thinking different. Because also the benefit is, as those things communicate up, they help to inform state and federal policy. With that, I will go ahead and now turn it over to Mr. Joel, who will continue.
Well, thank you, Chief. Okay, so the last on this tag team lineup. A little story here that 1 year ago today, or 1 year ago this week, I was invited to this event, and that was the first time I was ever introduced to the Army Cyber Institute at West Point. And I was very impressed seeing that cyber's elevating to that level in our defense organizations. So AECOM, and I have several people from the company with me here today, we met with the group at ACI at West Point, and they explained to us the Jack Voltaic exercise. And I get excited about a lot of things for those people that know me, but this one really excited me because I am also working under contract with the state of New York, and they're taking this whole threat situation very seriously. So when I saw what they did in New York, I was very excited that, I hope my slide's going to eventually come back, but that's okay. I was going to leave Judy's up there. The idea with the events that were occurring was that this is finally a reality of how we could start to put some level of society and a cyber impact on a live fire and a tabletop exercise. Because in many cases, when you look at these exercises, they tend to be single sector, right? So GridX is really, though it is a complex attack and they have a very heavily invested infrastructure which they run the tests on, in general it tends to be a single sector attack. So Jack Voltaic 1 introduced several sectors. We had telecommunications, we had transportation, health, which is awesome, police department, EMS, all of these are vital. So as we started to think about Jack Voltaic 2, where AECOM really entered into this partnership with the Army Cyber Institute, we said, let's start to make it probably a little bit too real. So if we think about what happens, there's a lot of events that can stress our infrastructure. And when we talk about stressing infrastructure, I mean stressing it from head to toe. Our entire infrastructure is worried about a given situation. It could be a foreign incident like what's going on in North Korea, or domestic incidents like what happened in Texas this weekend. But the idea here is, again, we're talking about cyber conflict. How could a situation that would be seemingly out of our control be used as kind of an accelerator for a situation of significance? Let's put it at a 9/11 order of magnitude. So you kind of think about, well, what are you talking about? Well, it's becoming very well known that during these type of external events, when we stress our infrastructure, a lot of things that aren't supposed to happen, happen. So for instance, during hurricanes, plants that normally never shut down, shut down. When plants shut down, there's no reason to keep the 500,000-700,000 people on staff. They go home and take care of their families. So all of a sudden you now have the potential for physical access into facilities, which could be used to do subsequent attacks. So the idea is, which environmental impact are you going to pick, right? We never know when a lightning strike's going to hit, unless you have a time machine and you know exactly when it's going to occur in 1955? But the idea here is that there are a couple of events that can be used in a predictable fashion. And when we started to think of the scenario, we wanted to pick something that actually everybody would start to say, we've never even given this much thought. Hurricanes, though they are very environmental and they can come about unexpected, typically a hurricane provides you a reasonable window upon which you know it's coming. Now again, its destination is always variable, but in general, when a hurricane pops up, you have days of advance. So imagine now that actually, which we would assume is fairly credible, the threat is already here. So the actors are actually in place and they need a trigger to actually start to launch a true coordinated cyber-physical attack with a single goal. A single impact, a societal impact is what I refer to it as. So we take this hurricane, and what was incredible about the opportunity, though the event was terrible, was Hurricane Harvey. So what I was able to do during Hurricane Harvey was actually take the DHS feeds that were coming out of OCIA and actually track the stability of several infrastructure components throughout the hurricane. And again, we got hit again, boom, with Irma. And then we got hit in Florida, and then we got hit again in Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands. So the idea was to kind of see if this was actually doable. So now what we start to do is we start to draw on the interdependencies of our infrastructure. So we're going to start to see that, though everybody wants you to think that electricity is the most important critical infrastructure sector, I'm going to show you how we can really look at this in an entirely different way, and electricity doesn't even come into play. So here's our hurricane, massive environmental events. This hurricane's destined for the Port of Houston. And as we started to see, one of the first things that occurred, I'm assuming I hit the green button, is that we started to shut down ports. The water situation and the stability of the ship channel became such that they needed to get ships moored so that they weren't going to cause potential damage to the surrounding assets on the ship channel, which could be devastating because it's a very important port to the United States. Well, now you're going to start to see a replication occur that becomes very significant very fast. So again, one of the early things that occurred was the port closure. Well, we depend on those particular ports to bring in goods and also to take goods away. One of those goods that came in is crude oil. So what happens now is some of the refineries were in a position that they believed they could maintain safe operation. It all depended on their location. So I actually worked in one of the refineries down on the ship channel when I started my career. And during hurricanes, we would always do proper risk assessments. And during the 3 hurricanes I went through, none of them ranked in the severity level to shut down the refinery. And one of those was a Category 4, never a Category 5. But the problem is, those refineries need crude oil in order to run. Because our infrastructure has become so interdependent, we don't tend to keep a lot of inventory. So now what happens is the refineries that were able to stay up are going to have to shut down because they no longer have crude oil. Well, that's going to be a problem now, right? So we were hoping to ride through, but we weren't able to. So then we start to look at the next dependency. As soon as refineries shut down, they stop making product. That means they stop making product that goes into pipelines. Pipelines can't operate if there's nothing going in the starting point. So they'll lose head pressure and they have to shut down the pipelines. So realize now this all happened. So now you've taken a regional impact. A hurricane hits the coast of Texas, and now you're feeling the impact throughout the southeast and up the eastern seaboard. Because the pipelines that were impacted, primarily the Colonial Pipeline, actually is a primary feeder of refined products to this part of the country. So we depend on Houston to get products up here. So again, you're starting to see this interdependency of yet another leg in transportation, right? Because pipelines actually fall under transportation. So the impact is starting to reach. And when transportation starts to get impacted, it's providing other windows of opportunities. So then in comes what's going on in Houston. The hurricane starts to subside. Now we get emergency responders that come into the picture. So we start to get massive assemblance of first responders from the region and from all over the country. So the one trigger point I was looking for at this particular time was how long it took for the governor to mobilize 100% of the National Guard. Because as soon as he's mobilized 100% of the Guard, we're starting to become less able to respond to a secondary event that could occur right now. So remember now, we're thinking bad stuff. We're thinking a major 9/11 great attack. So this infrastructure now is starting to become very, very fragile. Our resources are stretched. We don't have power. The reason I don't talk power in this scenario is because Houston showed that they could tolerate the lack of energy. The reason being that most of the critical infrastructure within the area actually was able to produce their own. The cost of self-generation of power has come down so much, most of the critical facilities actually never had power outages. Hospitals was a good example. So I think you're going to see where I'm going to go with this. So we found that we weren't as dependent on energy as we thought. What was really impressive, and you got to give commends to AT&T and Verizon and similar telcos, they maintained the telecommunications infrastructure as well. So Homeland's providing these feeds and they're tracking all of these assets and what their state is, whether or not they're operational or they've gone down. So telecoms is up, which we all realize that we are outrageously dependent on telecommunications, whether it's because of the cloud services that we use or because of the data centers that our company depends on. So now what's going on? The industry that started to slip into play here was the hospitals. So some of the hospitals were in areas that became flooded. So they had to start moving patients between hospitals to get them into safe, still maintaining sterile work environments. But the last piece of this puzzle that actually came into play was water treatment. Nobody ever would have thought that these plants were so critical. Now remember, most people prepare for hurricanes. They stock up on drinking water. So it's not the purification of water that we need, but it's the processing of waste. Trust me, when wastewater plants go down, cities shut down immediately. In comes the biggest problem I saw was that if one particular wastewater plant could not ride through the water issue and it came down, the major hospitals were going to have to come down too. What are you going to do with all those people? So now you've got this situation where our infrastructure it's paper thin. So could we actually tolerate a secondary attack? So the idea with Jack Voltaic, and I'll just put the eye candy up here, was to lay cyber on the effects of this after the hurricane. So to start to blend a cyber physical approach. Because remember now, the oil refineries shut down. Its skeletal crew provides an incredible opportunity for somebody with basic physical access to go in with relatively with relative ease and implement a Trojan on the control systems. The same thing with the water plants. Most of the people in the area obviously are taking care of their families, so everything is based on skeletal crews. So here comes the water plant. Again, the ability to go in and manipulate controls to start to use them not for the attack at this point, but the attack when you start to remobilize and reinitiate the infrastructure. So I don't want to take control of a downed chemical plant, but if you've ever been to that part of the country, some of those chemical plants make some very, very bad stuff, to the point that releases in that area could kill counties. So the idea now is to overlay this, and you're saying nobody would ever do it. Well, the government seems to think they could, which is the whole foundation of standards like the CFATS, the Chemical Facility Anti-Terrorism Standard. The whole idea is to understand the risk that these facilities face. And in this particular case, the opportunity that would never be granted, and for those that saw me in the last session, these Die Hard movies show up everywhere, but this was Die Hard 1, right? They're trying to break into the safe. It's got an impenetrable barrier until the FBI comes in and shuts down the grid. And all the locks open up mysteriously, right? So the whole idea here is to take what happened during Hurricane Harvey and overlay, this is the whole threat map of what occurred, with overlays on how we would pivot between physical attacks and cyber attacks against about 4 to 5 critical infrastructure key resources. And again, trying to keep the obvious guys out. So obviously this is the whole beauty of true. How much time do I have? I got probably
0.
Zero? Okay. I was just going to say the only way we could ever make this work is with a different form of public-private partnership, which of course it's AECOM working with ACI along with the University of Texas at San Antonio, Texas A&M University, University of Houston, Verizon, AT&T are coming back on. Citibank's likely going to come back on. So now we're actually creating this scenario, and in the 30 seconds, 15. The goal of this is to create a modular scenario. So in the end, the model will be able to be taken to different parts of the country where you can remove different aspects of it and create scenarios that would suit maybe a city like Atlanta or a city like Dallas. Obviously, Dallas doesn't have water. So you wouldn't have hurricane issues, but you have other environmental issues. So anyway, with that, I thank you.
All right, thank you, Joel. So on that somewhat dire note of an attack followed by another attack, we're open for audience questions for any or all of the speakers. And we have someone in the room with a microphone who will come to you if you raise your hand. The lady in the back, please.
Okay. Yeah, thanks so much for your presentations. So I have a question. NIST is the sponsor of the National Cybersecurity FFRDC in Rockville, Maryland, and they had a few different practice guides where they provide and publish reference architectures for cybersecurity solutions in different sectors. 2 of them related to energy. One was energy identity and access management. Another was energy situational awareness. I'm just curious as to whether those practice guides, publications, et cetera, are ones that you all reference, are aware of, and if so, just your feedback regarding them. And working with USM, which is partnered with MITRE as an operator of the FFRDC, that's my vantage point. So just very curious to hear your feedback regarding those, if you have any experience with them.
So from the Jacksonville perspective, yes. So while we're developing these experiments, we're ensuring that we are consulting with entities outside, predominantly in the government. So we consult with Department of Energy, Department of Homeland Security. In particular, with this experiment, we're working with the University of Texas in San Antonio. And so they actually have a cyber maturity model that explores this. And so the examples and the frameworks that you're talking about are very overarching. And so the goal with Jack will take is taking those overarching concepts and how do we help them to be defined and scaled for the municipality level. So yes.
And then I would add to that from the bottom side, the one thing that we're going to do on this that's going to be very unique is we are going to implement fully functional control systems. So it's not a couple of devices, but it's actually a system that runs, that is an actual system that would run a chemical plant with actual traffic, real graphics. So the idea there is to actually see, because I think what we're gonna be able to find is how the red team works their way down into there, and whether or not they're truly able to exploit and compromise the operations of each of those facilities. And again, using the same thing, I'm very familiar with those documents, and thank you for helping with them. So the reference frameworks are always good. Now, the one thing that always is the challenge in the ICS space is that the vendors typically dictate architecture, and their architectural requirements will always trump anything that NIST or any other standards organization would do, because they're designing it around a stable and secure operation for their particular system. So we use it to the best of our ability.
And I would say from a threat casting perspective, because we're looking 10 years in the future, one thing we explore is, given the frameworks today, where do we think they will be or should be in 10 years from now to deal with what reality is? And many of our suggested actions afterwards are definitely relooking how frameworks are currently structured as we move forward in the future and what that evolution might need to look like.
So Jack Voltaic question. Can you talk about how you conduct information sharing during the execution? And also, military, we're very used to working with a chain of command, but I know it's more of a collaborative environment in these types of exercises. Can you also talk about how that works during the execution?
Yes, so really quickly, so we definitely want to use existing best practices like the information sharing analysis cells. The iCELs is another construct that's being seen and utilized. We leverage those, but we are also trying to be innovative and see how a city, instead of communicating vertically during a typical cyber physical event where it goes up to the federal government, how does a city communicate across? And so right now, we don't have exact solutions for those, but we are exploring those in these experiments on how best that can happen. And so one of the results, as I shared with you, New York, fusion centers is one other example of how that's done. So,
right, and I'd just add, that's typically the biggest benefit that you get out of these exercises, is you realize that you don't have as well established comms and the ability to interact, especially when you start to do these sector interdependencies. So Jack Voltaic 2 is actually going to pull on the city of Houston, the county of Harris, and the state of Texas. So they're going to be able to pull resources. That's why the National Guard's a component in play. Plus, different emergency services are managed around the Houston area based on whether they're city or county resources. Because I was in emergency management in Texas. I actually live very near FEMA's Western Regional Operations Center in Denton County. And the one thing, I went through all the NIMS training, and it's a wonderful process. But when you go into those scenarios, the one thing that was always missing from the way FEMA handles incidents, like a hurricane, is the sectors weren't typically represented in there, right? So you would have all the emergency management organizations, fire and police and healthcare, but you tended to lack the industry sectors. So that's where they tend to get a lot of value, because you can either participate in the actual exercise or you can be an observer. But you'll start to get the understanding of how this works in a real situation and be able to grow on the deficiencies and then come back and correct your own internal processes. That's it, okay?
yes.
We got time for only one more question.
So I wanted to say that this is Jack Voltaic has some great collaboration, but there seems to be one partnership missing, and it's a lot at the state level, the county level, and the city level. But what attempts and what room do you think there could be to involve a larger intel piece of that and providing what the IC potentially has during these catastrophes and their insights as well?
So, no, that's an excellent question, because ultimately, coming from the military and working in the cyber mission forces, and the intelligence community is very necessary. And so, again, these are initial steps, experimentations on how we can figure it out at the city level. But again, as we figure these things out, they will be communicated up to eventually help to inform the intelligence community and help refine those processes, because absolutely we need to improve on how we're communicating up, and to include Department of Homeland Security and Department of Energy.
Okay, well, let's thank our panelists again.
Good job, Will.
Good job.
And we'll
Good job.
present them with the lovely glass spears.
Nice.
Thank you.
Judy?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
That's it.